Morning, church. It is lovely to be with you this morning. I wonder what it took from you to get here this morning. I wonder whether or not the dark and grey mornings meant you leapt out of bed or pulled the duvet slightly further over your nose. I wonder, were you tired this morning? Did you grumble this morning? Maybe as you got out of the car or walked down the street and approached the church, did you take a deep breath, slap on a smile, fake a "I'm fine, thanks, how are you"? Maybe you were excited to be here. There was somebody specific that you really wanted to catch up with or chat to. And maybe there was just joy in your heart at the thought of coming and worshipping God and being amongst people. All of us experience this present moment differently, and yet we can probably resonate with each of our experiences. There's a commonality between our stories, because whatever got us to this point, it matters that we are here now, in this place, at this moment, singing with one voice, "We exalt you, Lord." This morning, I wanted to talk about holiness and the presence of God. I want us to explore an aspect of what it means to be human, that to be human is to be present, and that in God we see that presence is utterly and captivatingly holy. To start our exploration of holiness, I want to talk to you about an ongoing trauma in my life. The trauma of the shoe rack. Or more specifically, the area surrounding the shoe rack. I don't know, but maybe your hallway suffers, like mine, from endless pairs of shoes that never seem to make it to said shoe rack. They're like magnets with opposing poles that sort of repel as opposed to attract. They never make it to the shoe rack. They came to congregate at the bottom of the stairs, in the hallway, often in doorways, and basically anywhere that I can trip over them. It is maddening. My children seem to have about 2,000 pairs of shoes between them. My husband, on the other hand, only has a few, but his are size 12. They're enormous. And every single day, they seem to drift from their home right into the middle of my path for me to trip over. Infuriating. And yet, so often, these shoes in my hallway don't actually even belong to the people in whom live in my house. They are often belonging to the kids down the street, or a neighbour passing by, or a friend dropping in for a chat. So often, these piles of shoes signify a home full of people, a place where people are welcomed, a place where too many times to count, the shoes that I'm tripping over, I don't even recognise. People often take off their shoes when they enter a home. Whatever else may be going on as to why they feel compelled to do so, part of the reason is a sign that they are accepting my gift of hospitality. They are coming near. There's something holy for me about these piles of shoes. I even every now and then get a little choked up to see them. That here in a mess, people are welcome and they take off their shoes as they come in. Now, before I go into what on earth taking your shoes off has to do with holiness, we need to spend a moment to understand what holiness is. For the longest time, I thought holiness was about being set apart. You may have heard that phrase before, right? It is separate, it is other. Now, there is utter truth here. But I've noticed that many times when we talk about the idea that God is holy, we put in this distance with God. And there becomes this myth that God is somehow alien and and separate because he's so holy. That he is so holy, he can't come near us, that our presence would corrupt him in some way. We lose sight of the idea that God is the God who from the very beginning walked and talked with Adam in the garden. You see, holiness isn't about distance and separation. It's about encounter and coming near. Tim Mackey defines holiness as proximity to God. God is therefore the most holy because God is himself. And therefore, anything that gets closer to God becomes more and more holy. We see it in the temple, the Holy of Holies. The closer to God's presence in a temple space, the holier it is. It may seem like semantics to you, but for me, it was really helpful to flip that side of the coin. That yes, there is a setting apart, a coming away from the corruption and the mess and the chaos. But actually, it's about coming near, drawing closer to the God who draws close to us, to be in his presence, to come on in. So, with that in mind, let's look at that first encounter of shoes off holiness that we see in the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, you might want to read along with me. We're in Exodus, which is right at the beginning of the Bible. It's the second book, and we're in chapter 3, so we're towards the beginning of that book. And we are meeting with Moses. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. Now Moses. He was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, where the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. So he thought, I'll go over, see this strange sight. Why is the bush not burning up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses! And Moses said, Here I am. Don't come any closer, said God. Take off your sandals, for the place that you are standing on is holy ground. Here, early in the second book of the God story, we find a murderous, exiled prince of Egypt, Moses, hanging out as a hired shepherd in the back end of the desert. Even deserts have hierarchies, and Moses is wandering around at the bottom. We find him in the least sought out of places, in a place called Horeb, where a bush is on fire and yet not burning up. There is a voice calling out from the bush, Moses, you're standing on holy ground. Take off your shoes. Moses had come close to God. Without realizing it, he had entered a holy place, a temple where God's presence was. God's presence was near. This should catch our attention. In the least desirable place, with the least desirable person, God is getting up close and personal. In the desert, in the wastelands, as far from the perfection of the garden temple of Eden, God is still there. And God doesn't send Moses away. No. Instead, he extends an invitation of hospitality. Take your shoes off before you come in. The myth that God is so holy, so other, so separate, that he can't cope with us in his presence just does not hold up to the narrative of the God story. God's presence is constantly turning up in the mess. In the middle of humanity's chaos and dirt and muck and corruption, we see God there. He's not waiting for humanity to sort ourselves out before we can return to him. Time and time again, he says, I will be with you, I will go for you, I will save you. On my daughter's second birthday, my husband and I walked into her bedroom to wake her up and to start the celebrations of the day. But as we woke her, we realised that somehow she had managed to vomit in the night while she was sleeping and not wake up. Add into the fact that she'd obviously had beetroot for tea the night before, you can start to get a flavour of where we are. Ugh. She was covered in the stuff. It was all over her face, it was in her hair, it had gone on the bedclothes. It was grim. She wasn't ill. She didn't seem distressed or to even really notice in any simple way. We, on the other hand, were working very hard to cover up our repulsion. But it was her birthday. So we clapped and we cheered and we said, thanking God for the naivety of 2-year-olds, let's have a birthday bath, as that's how all birthdays start. Our love for our daughter was obviously undiminished, but she and everything around her had been affected by what had happened in the night. We couldn't just pretend that she wasn't covered in vomit and carry on the day as if nothing had happened. But nor could we leave her, a 2-year-old, to sort herself up before she came to us in our nice clean clothes. No. Instead, we picked her up, covering ourselves in the mess too, washed her clean, cleaned her up, exchanging all that was dirty for what was fresh and new. It's safe to say it didn't feel like a holy moment. It was messy and dirty and gross. But it was the most holy of moments because our love compelled us into her presence to transform her into something fresh and clean. Our love drove us into her mess. Our love for her cleaned her up. Our love for her meant that we could not leave her as she was. And we're just mere image bearers of the character of God. We represent him in fragments. So how much more must the holiness of God compel him into our mess? God is the one who always comes near. He is always concerned about you, about everyone, our places and our culture. So much so, he became human. He didn't leave us in our mess, but he came to clear it up so that we can come near to him. So if this is our picture of holiness, what is its opposite? The opposite of a personal God coming near to us, inviting us into his presence, is the story of absence, the dehumanizing story of distance and disorientation that surrounds us today. Humanity has always had a tendency to go it alone. Genesis 3, right at the beginning, Satan whispers the temptation into Eve's ear, you can have it all on your own terms. Eat the fruit and be like God, but do it by yourself. Or what about a few chapters later, where we see that Babel is the pinnacle of human power? At the height of the ancient world's technological age, it is a moment and a monument of accomplishment and splendor, a tower to gaze up upon and marvel at, to worship humanity's strength as we go it alone. Look what we did, all by ourselves. But at what cost? Without the power of God partnering, without the life of God with them. The text hints at the use of a different power. It talks about making bricks. And for those of you who spot inference, you might notice what it is to make bricks hints at a coming future oppressive power, the slavery power of Egypt. Scripture is inviting us to notice that Babel, in their attempts to be like God, to build up, was built on the necks of others. And dripping with irony, the text tells us that God had to come down to see the city and see what humanity had done. In going alone, they hadn't got even close to heaven. It's a lie that we don't need God. And it's a tragedy that when we realize we do, we're often too ashamed to come back to him. We think that we have to sort ourselves out first. Because our cultural story isn't one of nearness and connection. It's often about separation and distance. The go it alone and sort yourself out storyline is everywhere. The secular story of our age isn't so much anti-God, but pro-doubt. We should doubt everything. And as that is revered, we don't just doubt, we become suspicious and skeptical. Authority should be treated with caution. And in so doing, we've given rise to this idea of postmodernism and deconstructionism, two quite complicated words that simply mean don't trust. Don't trust truth because it's perspective. Don't trust reality because you could be biased. Don't trust your own sense of what is right or what somebody else tells you because you may be wrong. And so we focus in, as everything else is shifting around us, what is the one thing that we can think might be solid? It becomes ourselves. But I don't know about you, I don't often feel like particularly solid ground. I often feel just as battered and uncertain, as shaky as the rest of it. And so I stand alone, independent, but often isolated, too often absent from others and from God. Because absence isn't a nothing. We feel it, we notice it. It can define a space. A gap that should have been filled, a thing that was missing, a chair that should not be empty. We experience the loss of what should be but is now gone. We grieve absence. We mourn loss. Because to be human is to recognize the importance of being here and now. And when something is not here and now, it is not as it should be. Without God to conquer death and give us hope of presence, what is left? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die? We build distance and numbness into our lives, and our society is one that separates. Few of us have to deal with the messiness of life. The bins, for example, vanish every week, unless they don't, and then you really notice it, especially in summer. But it's just this assumption, as soon as it's gone, out of sight, out of mind. I work in King's Cross, and sometimes if I'm early to work, I can still see the carnage of nights before with takeaway packets and beer bottles and everything else. But normally, if I'm on time for work, I walk down the street and it's clear, as if nothing had happened. It's all been swept away. What about the emotional messiness of our lives? As we struggle with increased inequality, depression, prescription drug use, isolation, and loneliness. Over a quarter of the adult population of England is currently being prescribed antidepressants, painkillers, and related medication. Over the pond, nearly 70% of Americans are on at least one prescription drug, while more than half take two. Children are being medicated with stimulants, antidepressants, and ADHD drugs. Students are anxious, risk-averse, concerned for their mental health, and increasingly experiencing depression. Something is not as it should be. So many of our lives take place in virtual spaces. Many of us will have moved online to shop, thank goodness, because Christmas is a nightmare, to work, to date, to relate to family and friends in a globally connected world. It means that we can move from one space and still be connected to another. It can be an amazing gift. But at what cost? We become so used to it, do we actually ask ourselves what it costs us to no longer have proximity to each other? We are separate in our homes, closing our doors and closing off our lives. The Brits are especially bad at this because we don't want to impose or intrude. Loneliness and isolation can often prevail. And while the mental health challenges soar, as many of us struggle with our past, our bodies, and our place in the world, it is not good for man to be alone. And into the midst of this mess, we see Jesus. Not just an image bearer, but the image of the invisible God. God made visible. And as he comes, as we will sing in the next few weeks, Emmanuel, God with us, we realize it's not a name, but a title. He is the Holy One, the with us God. God made flesh and come amongst us. We could read in John 1, verses 1 to 5 and 12 to 14 from the Message. It puts it like this. The Word was first. The Word was present to God, and God present to the Word. The Word was God, in readiness for God from day one. Everything was created through him. Nothing, not one thing, came into existence without life. And the life was the light to live by. The life light blazed out of the darkness, and the darkness could not put it out. And then on to verse 12. Whoever did want him, whoever believed that he was who he claimed to be and would do what he said, he made to become their true selves, their child of God selves. These are the God-begotten, not blood-begotten, not sex-begotten, not flesh-begotten. The Word became flesh, blood, and moved into the neighborhood. We see the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous, inside and out, true, from start to finish. We see God when we see Jesus. We see the love of God made flesh and bone. The God who wants us to come near to him came near to us first. Love drove Jesus into the mess of people's lives. Jesus is the temple of God, the holy body that carries and contains the presence of God. But he was also a Palestinian man. He spoke Aramaic. He came from Nazareth, a hick town that few people cared about. He was circumcised on the 8th day. He went to temple, observed Passover. He had family and friends. He learned his father's trade. He was baptized in the River Jordan. He was tempted in every way. He went to parties and weddings. He even helped out when supplies were low. Jesus didn't just teach who God was. He showed up in the everyday of people's lives. He was utterly and physically present. The life of Jesus shows us the personal and present God who come near to us, becoming like us so that we don't ever have to be alone. Jesus who spat in the mud to heal a blind man. Jesus who made a child's pack lunch feed thousands. Jesus who comforted the grieving and raised the dead back to life. He did not merely point the way to God. teaching people Jordan Peterson style about how you can pull yourself up by your bootstrings, take back control and sort your lives out. If we were truly capable of doing that, the self-help section in a bookshop would not constantly be growing because one of those books would have worked by now. And yet here we are. No, instead, Jesus himself is the way back to God. The mess of our sin, our failure to live out in relationship with God, drove Jesus all the way to the cross. And as we read in Colossians 1:21, the Message puts it like this: but now, by giving himself completely at the cross, actually dying for you, Christ brought you over to God's side and your lives together, whole and holy in his presence. As we've been singing and chatting this morning, we're in Advent, this season of looking back at the arrival of Jesus, his birth in a body, in a place, at a time. But Advent is also the season of looking forward to the end of days, the promise of eternal presence. This hope that was the foretaste of Jesus' life is the eternal presence that we have coming at the second coming, where we will all be invited to take off our shoes and to come and be with him, to live with him, to be holy in his presence. And we today are living in the in-between, the gap of what was, has already been, and that which certainly will be. The hope that Jesus' birth will be fulfilled in his second coming. And we are his followers, his good news people, where the Emmanuel, the with us God, invites us to be present in the world, to be his temple, to carry his holiness out into the world, to step into people's lives, into the mess, to get involved, and then to invite others to come in and experience the presence of God too. So today, consider maybe, as you prepare for Christmas, what does it mean to be his holy presence out in the world? Do you get caught up in the shopping lists and the present buying, the how on earth can it only be 22 nights until Christmas? Ugh. Actually, what does it mean for me to open myself up, to be prepared to get stuck in, to acknowledge the mess and the complications of the lives around me, and to carry God's holy presence into that space? Or maybe today, you need to hear afresh the voice of God calling your name, inviting you back into his presence. Because all of this points to an ultimate truth, that the gospel is the good news, as we are told in Matthew 11, of Jesus saying, "Come to me, all of you who are weary, who are carrying heavy burdens. Come to me and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, for I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and the burden I give you is light." This isn't an invitation for when you've got more time. It's not when the kids are older, when you've passed your exams or you've finished work. It's not the once a year invitation when you go to that conference or you get to that worship event or you just get a bit of a holiday. It's not when you're less distracted, a better friend, a better partner, a better parent or a better kid, or just plain better than you are now. Jesus is always inviting us to come near. In our messy lives, he is always showing us the God who is present. He wants to be present to us right here, right now, There is no later with Jesus. There has only ever been and will always be today. Through his life, he shows us perfectly who God is and who we can be in him. And through his death, there is an invitation that has ripped open the presence of God. In the word of the Dutch theologian Hans Roetmaker, Jesus didn't come to make us Christian. He came to make us fully human. Come to Jesus, and he will give rest for your souls. Let's pray. Holy, holy, holy God, Lord of maker and earth. All the earth is filled with your glory. Holy, holy, holy. Lord, forgive us. Forgive us when we have made your holiness something to draw away from, and failing to notice that your holiness is the thing that draws us to you. Lord, help us in our mess. Don't let us become numb to it or distant from it or just plain caught up in it. But Lord, help us to accept your invitation to come near, to take off our shoes and to be transformed by your presence. Lord, help us to open our hands and our hearts and our lives to carry your holy presence out into the world. Let us remember the message of Jesus, the Emmanuel, the with us God is come. And Lord, today, for those of us who are weary, for those of us who are burdened, those of us who know too well the messiness of life, help us hear your invitation to come and find rest for our souls. Come, Lord Jesus, your holiness and presence is welcome in this place.